The gunman came through the revolving doors at 10:47 in the morning. Three of them. Tactical gear. Weapons that communicated the situation clearly and immediately to everyone in the First Capital Bank lobby who had been standing in line or sitting in chairs or walking toward the teller windows doing the ordinary business of a Tuesday. The ordinary business stopped. People went to the floor. Not everyone immediately. There is always the moment of disbelief, the fraction of a second where the brain refuses the information because the information does not fit the setting. A bank lobby on a Tuesday morning. Marble floors. A security guard at the door who had not been fast enough. Fluorescent lights. Then the weapons were louder and everyone went to the floor. He was already down. Not because he was faster than everyone else. Because he had pulled the woman beside him down first and then gone down himself, and his hand was on her back and he was saying something to her quietly that the room was too loud to hear but that she was nodding to, which meant it was the right thing and she could receive it. The woman beside him was the CEO of a company that employed 900 people, and she did not know the man whose hand was on her back, and she did not know why his presence was making the most frightening moment of her professional life feel approximately 30% less unsurvivable. She would think about that 30% for a long time afterward. Before we begin, if you believe that the way a person behaves in the moments they did not choose tells you everything about who they actually are, please like this video, subscribe to Kindness Tales, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people today. His name was Cal Merritt. He was 38 years old and he had been in the bank for 11 minutes when the doors came open. He had been in line because a payroll issue with a small contractor he used required an in-person resolution that could not be handled online, which was the kind of errand that costs a morning and that he had been meaning to handle for 2 weeks and had finally handled today. He ran a home renovation company with 7 employees. Not a large operation. The kind of business that runs on reputation and relationships and the specific trust of people who are letting you into their houses and need to believe you will treat them correctly. He had built it from one contract at 29 after leaving a corporate construction firm that had paid better and required him to be a version of himself he did not like particularly. He had a 9-year-old son named Arlo who was at school 20 minutes from here and who did not know his father was on the floor of a bank lobby, and Cal intended to keep it that way by being the kind of person who managed this correctly. He had looked at the room the moment the doors opened. He had assessed it in the way he assessed everything, quickly and without drama, the habit of someone who had spent years walking into situations and understanding them before deciding what to do. He had pulled the woman beside him down because she had been slower to process and slower to move, and the man nearest to her was moving toward her in a way that was going to attract attention, and he had made the calculation in under 2 seconds. She was down. He was down. His hand was on her back. He was saying, "Breathe normally. Look at the floor. Do not look at them directly. You are doing fine." She was doing fine. Her name was Elise Vora. She was 46 years old and she was the founder and CEO of a healthcare logistics company that she had built over 15 years into one of the most respected operations in its sector. She had been in the bank for a board-related wire transfer that her assistant had arranged and that required her signature in person. She had been standing behind a man in a canvas jacket when the doors opened. She had been slow. He had not been slow. She was on the floor and his hand was on her back, and she was breathing normally and looking at the floor, and she was not looking at the men with the weapons, which was the correct decision, and she knew it was the correct decision because the person beside her was communicating it with the absolute certainty of someone who has thought this through before she needed him to. She said quietly, "Have you done this before?" He said, "Not exactly this. I know how to be still." She said, "How?" He said, "I have a son. Being still is something you learn when someone needs you to be." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "What's his name?" He said, "Arlo." She said, "How old?" He said, 9. He is in school right now doing long division, which he will tell me about in detail at dinner." She said, "You're talking about dinner?" He said, "I find it helps to know what comes next." She said, "Dinner comes next." He said, "Dinner comes next." A kindness tale. The lobby had gone into the particular suspended state that hostage situations create, where time becomes irregular and the ordinary sounds of a building disappear and everyone present is doing the same thing, which is being very still and waiting for information about what happens now. The gunmen were at the teller windows. One was managing the room. Two were behind the counter. The management of the room involved periodic instructions delivered at volume and the establishment of a perimeter that everyone on the floor was complying with. Cal was watching without watching. The peripheral attention of someone who has decided that information is useful and that gathering it does not require being visible about it. Elise was doing the same. She said, very quietly, "There are 3. 1 managing. 2 at the windows. The one managing is watching the door more than he's watching us." He said, "I noticed that." She said, "That means he's concerned about external intervention." He said, "Which means someone has already called." She said, "Which means we wait." He said, "We wait." A kindness tale. Before we continue, Kindness Tales wants you to know something about how Cal became the person who knew how to be still. His son Arlo had been diagnosed with a severe anxiety disorder at age 6. Not the ordinary anxiety of childhood, which is real and manageable, but the kind that made some mornings impossible and some public places unsurvivable and required from Cal a quality of steadiness that he had not known he possessed until it was required. He had learned it from a therapist named Dr. Osei who worked with Arlo and who had taught Cal, in a series of parent sessions that Cal had attended without exception, that anxiety escalates in proportion to the energy you bring to containing it. That the most powerful thing a parent can do in a moment of crisis is model the state they want the child to reach. That steadiness is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to be useful despite it. Cal had practiced this for 3 years. He had practiced it in supermarkets when Arlo could not manage the noise. He had practiced it in waiting rooms and school pickups and on Tuesday mornings when the week had already been hard and it was only Tuesday. He had practiced it until it was not practice anymore but the actual shape of how he moved through difficult things. Dr. Osei had given him that. Without knowing, he was also giving it to a woman on a marble floor in a bank lobby on a Tuesday 3 years later. There was also a man named Frank who had been Cal's foreman for 4 years and who had taught him something about reading rooms. Frank had 30 years of construction sites, which are environments where the failure to read a room correctly has physical consequences, and he had passed this skill to Cal the way skilled people pass things, not through instruction but through proximity and example and the occasional pointed question at the right moment. Frank did not know he was in that bank lobby. He was at a job site 20 minutes away. He was in the lobby anyway, in the peripheral attention Cal was using and the quiet assessment and the decision to gather information without being visible about it. This is what Kindness Tales believes. The person who stays calm in the room that has gone wrong is almost always someone who was taught how by someone who loved them or trusted them or simply showed them the way without naming it as a lesson. Steadiness travels. Person to person. Year to year. Room to room. The situation resolved in 43 minutes. Law enforcement had surrounded the building at the 11-minute mark. The negotiation that followed was conducted through the building's intercom system. The gunman made an assessment of the situation that matched reality and made the only decision available to them. The weapons went down at 11:30. People began to stand up. Elise stood. Cal stood beside her. She turned and looked at him fully for the first time, which is the thing you do when a situation ends and the person who was beside you through it becomes someone you are seeing rather than someone you are relying on. She said, "You kept me from making it worse." He said, "You kept yourself." "I just said some words." She said, "The words were the right ones." He said, "I have a lot of practice." She said, "Your son." He said, "He has anxiety. I have learned how to be the steady thing in the room. It turns out the skill is transferable." She looked at him. She said, "What do you do?" He told her. The company. The 7 employees. The renovation work. The reputation built on being the person people let into their houses. She said, "You let me put my trust in you without asking for it." He said, "The situation asked for it. I just responded." She said, "Most people don't." He said, "Most people haven't had 3 years of practice with a 9-year-old who needed them to." She said, "Arlo." He said, "Arlo." She said, "Is he really doing long division?" He said, "He is. He finds it calming. The steps are always the same. He likes things where the steps are always the same." She said, "I understand that feeling." He said, "Most people do if they're honest." Outside the bank the street had filled with the presence of law enforcement and the particular controlled chaos of a situation being resolved and documented and processed. People who had been inside were being directed to a staging area for statements. The morning that had been a Tuesday had become something else, the kind of day that gets a story attached to it that gets told for years. Elise stood on the pavement and thought about 30%. She thought about a hand on her back and a voice that said dinner comes next. She thought about a 9-year-old doing long division because the steps are always the same and a father who had learned steadiness as an act of love and had brought it with him into a room where she needed it without knowing she would. She had a company with 900 employees. She had a facilities contract that was up for renewal in 3 months with a provider she had been less than satisfied with for the past year. She thought about a man who built his business on being the person people trusted inside their houses. She said, "Can I ask you something professional?" He said, "Yes." She said, "We have a significant facilities need. Office renovation and ongoing maintenance across 3 locations. I have not been well served by our current provider. I do not know if your company does work at that scale." He said, "Not currently. We could." She said, "Would want to see your work." He said, "I can arrange that." She said, "Would also want to speak to your clients." He said, "All 7 of them will answer the phone." She said, "That's a good sign." He said, "I built the company on the understanding that the person letting you into their house is doing something that requires trust and that trust has to be earned specifically and maintained consistently. The scale is different with a corporate client. The principle is the same." She said, "You said that like someone who has thought about it." He said, "I think about the things that matter to me. This matters to me." She said, "Your son matters to you." He said, "Everything else is in service of that." She looked at him. She said, "I have been in business for 15 years and I have hired a great many people and I have become reasonably good at knowing who someone is from a short conversation." He said, "What do you know?" She said, "I know that you are someone who does what he says and says what he does and that the people who let you into their houses know this and that is why all 7 of them will answer the phone." He said, "That's accurate." She said, "It's also what I need." She handed him her card. He looked at it. He looked at her. He said, "I came in here to resolve a payroll issue." She said, "Did you resolve it?" He said, "I did not get to the window." She said, "Some days give you something different than what you came for." He said, "Apparently." She said, "Call my office tomorrow. We'll arrange a site visit." He said, "I'll call." She said, "I know you will." She walked toward the police liaison officer who was managing the statements. He stood on the pavement for a moment and called the school. Arlo was in class. Everything was fine. The school had not heard about the bank. Cal left a message that he would be at pickup as usual. He stood on the pavement in the Tuesday that had become something else and thought about Dr. Osei who had taught him that steadiness was not the absence of fear but the decision to be useful despite it. He thought about Frank on the job site reading the room. He thought about Arlo at his desk right now working through long division because the steps are always the same. He thought, everything I know that matters I learned in service of that boy. And apparently that knowledge goes places I did not expect. He put his phone in his pocket. He went to give his statement. At pickup that afternoon, Arlo came out of school with a worksheet in his hand and a specific expression that meant he had done something he was pleased about and was waiting for the right moment to present it. In the car he said, "I finished all the long division." Cal said, "How was it?" Arlo said, "Good. The steps are always the same. It's calming." Cal said, "I know." Arlo said, "How was your day?" Cal said, "Eventful." Arlo said, "Good eventful or bad eventful?" Cal said, "Started bad. Ended good." Arlo said, "What happened in the middle?" Cal said, "I was in a difficult situation and I stayed calm." Arlo said, "Like we practice." Cal said, "Exactly like we practice." Arlo said, "Did it work?" Cal said, "It worked." Arlo looked at the worksheet in his hand. He said, "I think practicing things is important." Cal said, "I think you're right." Arlo said, "Even when it's hard at the time." Cal said, "Especially then." Arlo thought about this. He said, "Okay. What's for dinner?" Cal said, "Pasta." Arlo said, "Good. The steps for pasta are always the same too." Cal laughed. "The full kind. The kind from somewhere genuine." He drove home through the Tuesday afternoon that had become something else and would become a story and would be told for years. He thought about dinner. He thought about the steps that are always the same. He thought about Arlo. Everything else was in service of that. Everything else had a way of working out. If this story stayed with you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe to Kindness Tales for more stories of quiet strength, unexpected grace, and the people who bring steadiness to rooms that need it most. Because the most important thing you can practice is how to be the calm in someone else's storm. You never know which room will need it. Or who will be beside you when it does. Welcome to Kindness Tales. We are so glad you are here.